Because today's webinar is all about managing your work, time, and energy, I want to make sure that we get started right at 11 o'clock and respect all of your time so that we can finish up here right at noon or whatever time it might be in your respective time zones. It's 11 o'clock here out in a very gloomy and rainy Santa Cruz, California today. But again, thank you for joining me. I've been thinking about doing this webinar for a really long time. This is one of those topics that we at the Osborne Group, we offer this topic as a workshop topic, as a training topic, and we very rarely get taken up on it, I will be honest. But it's kind of the last thing that as we're planning webinars and trainings, we don't always think about doing this topic, but it's something that when I talk to clients and when I talk to my colleagues out in the nonprofit sector, it's something that comes up all the time. And so often I'll go and do training sessions or workshops on things like major gift strategies or donor retention or sharing your vision and impact. These are kind of the topics that are really popular, and I'll go and I'll do a training session and people will come up to me afterwards and say, gosh, Laurel, that's really great. It's all really great information that you're sharing, and I really want to do this, but I don't have time. I just don't have time to do these things that I know are going to be the things that are going to move the needle, that I know are going to be the things that are ultimately going to have a way bigger impact on our bottom line, but I'm so bogged down with all of these other activities. And so as I was thinking about the first webinar of 2017 and what I wanted to do, I thought, this is a good time for us to revisit this topic of managing your work and your time and your energy, and how do you get the most out of your work and out of your time and out of your energy. And so I start out with this cartoon, and I'll first preface this by saying that the reason that I feel absolutely qualified to talk to you all about this topic today is not because I am a management guru or a master of time management. In fact, quite the opposite. If there is procrastination to be done, I will do it. If there is a rationalization that needs to be made for why things aren't getting done, I am the queen of rationalization. And in some ways, I think my approach to this topic is from a place of completely understanding that this is really hard, and completely understanding why you have to do all of these extra things to help make you more productive and help keep you on top of things, to do the things that you really want to do. This really speaks to me and speaks to what I know about my colleagues out in the nonprofit sector. When we talk about, work-life balance, and you've got to cut back and you're spending too much time in the office, and, all of these things, and people kind of say, okay, I'm really making a concerted effort, and we're going to putting together our plan this year, and we're going to cut back on what we're going to say we're going to do. And then, the reality is you get a few months into that plan, and unbeknownst to kind of everyone, suddenly all of these activities have been added back into the plan. And we always have good intentions to be more focused and to choose the highest return on investment activities. But then somehow all of these other things kind of creep back in, and our ice cream bowl suddenly, even though it's a tiny, tiny bowl, suddenly is overflowing with ice cream. Unfortunately, the things that tend to pile up on top of us are not nearly as appealing as ice cream, and so it's not always such a great thing. So what is it that keeps us from doing the things that we want to do? And I love this quote by Peter Drucker, which is that adequacy is the enemy of excellence. And so often I can remember when I was first in development, and I was a one person shop running a development office, and I can remember feeling like I was getting everything done. I was hitting my to-do list. I was getting, I was hitting goals. I was, it was fine. Let's put it that way. Everything was fine. But I knew I wasn't doing anything really, really well. I knew that I was kind of just getting everything done, but I wasn't being excellent in anything. I wasn't excelling. I wasn't getting better in any area because I barely had time to just get the bare minimum done. And that led to a lot of frustration. And I've had colleagues in the nonprofit sector say to me, Laurel, it's great that we strive for excellence, but is that realistic, right? Is it realistic for us to say that we're striving for excellence? And I absolutely think it's absolutely realistic that we should strive for excellence. And excellence, of course, being different things to different people. And, I think ultimately all of these things, capacity issues, lack of accountability, all of the distractions that we have in the day, a lack of prioritization. This is a big one that people have. Poor planning and bad habits. All of these things are contributing to this underlying feeling of frustration that we have, which is, and for all of you, I bet if I could reach out to all of you that are on the phone today and ask you what your frustration is. Your frustration is slightly different. Some of you wish that you had more time to spend on major gifts. Some of you feel like you're doing a really great job doing donor strategy, but you don't have time to actually get out the door and meet people in person. For some of you, it's vice versa. Some of you feel like you're getting out the door, but you're not prepared. When you get in front of donors, you don't have enough time to actually strategize and plan for those donor visits. Some of you, it might be that you're not spending enough time on, your team, developing your team. So for all of you, that frustration, that circle in the middle is something different. And so I want you all to take a second right now and just think about, what is that frustration? What is that excellence? What would it look like for you to wake up in the morning and feel like, I'm going to achieve excellence today? And what would it look like at the end of the day for you to have accomplished that? And so think about that. And as we go through some of these contributors to this frustration, I want you to think about, how do you attack some of these contributors so that you can really get to that core frustration that you have. Now, of course, our biggest challenge is we have all of these natural conflicts, right? These natural conflicts that exist in our work, right? So there's this whole conflict between, do I spend time strategizing on, doing donor strategy, or do I just get out the door, right? I hear this all the time from practitioners out in the field. And I hear this a lot from managers too, right? Managers that are frustrated, and some of you out there are managers frustrated with their staff. Because some of you feel like, gosh, they're great strategists, they've set up really great systems, but I cannot get them out the door to just meet with donors, right? But yet the conflict is, if all I'm doing is running out the door and meeting with people and never taking that time to really plan effectively, then those visits aren't all that productive anyway. So we've got to find that balance. Of course, the constant balance between, new donors and retention, right? So how much time do we spend on acquisition? How much time do we go out and focus on acquisition strategies and identifying new donors, versus how much time do we spend retaining those donors we already have and upgrading them? And, so of course there's a lot of data, and we could talk forever about that debate, but it's a conflict that exists for all of you. Again, this conflict that exists between closing gifts and respecting donor readiness, right? So, you've all got pressures on you to revenue pressures, right? At the end of the day, there's a bottom line, and you've got to hit that bottom line. And so as much as we want to talk about, respecting readiness and asking when a donor is ready, ultimately you've got revenue goals that you've got to hit. So you've got that natural conflict. And then finally, kind of the biggest conflict, and maybe the most important one that people struggle with, is work-life balance, right? And so ultimately, do you live to work, or do you work to live? And I get that people are on different places in the spectrum on that, but there ultimately has to be some balance, right? And so I know that a lot of you out there are incredibly dedicated to the causes that you work for, but you likewise have to reset, and you can't be as effective to those causes if you're stressed and you're tired and you're not working at your max efficiency, right? And so even if you can kind of mentally fight through the burnout is ultimately affecting how well you're achieving everything you want for your cause. So you have to find that balance. So ultimately, we have to start by identifying our priorities. So often I talk to people and I say, well, what should you be working on? And people don't really know, right? Or we have some vague idea. We think we know what we should be working on. Some of you absolutely will know what your priorities are. And some of you probably have really good systems in place to focus yourselves on those priorities. But I would imagine that there's a lot of you who know where I feel like people tend to sit is that they have a pretty good sense of what their priorities should be, but they're just not there. So there's an idea that we know what we should be working on. We know what the things are that are going to move the needle, that are going to push us forward, but we're getting bogged down with all of these other activities. So if in fact you are one of those people who don't have a good sense of your priorities, take some time to figure that out. And your priorities should be things that contribute to the mission and the vision, right? They should, everything you do should be assessed and analyzed and take a really hard look at these things and ask yourself the hard questions and be really honest about whether or not the things you're doing are actually contributing to the mission and vision of your organization. Are they helping you to achieve high priority goals? So think about the amount of time you spend on things that are just checking off a box, that are obligatory, that are, quite honestly, not a good use of your time, but because somebody put it in front of you, you feel like you have to do it. And it's not achieving a high priority goal. It's not contributing to the mission and vision, and it's not keeping with shared institutional values. So again, really focus on that. And then this fourth bullet, this is the big one. It has to be tied to a written plan. And any of you who have been on webinars with me in the past will know that I am a stickler when it comes to having a written plan. And for those of you who don't have a written plan, I would actually encourage you to go to my YouTube channel, and I'll be sending a link out of this webinar so that you can watch it again later, share it with others. When you go to that link, that will take you to my YouTube channel. I have another webinar there around creating a fund development plan. So if you don't have a fund development plan, please go check out that webinar or email me. I'd love to talk to you more about it. It's a crucial thing, because without your plan, it's really hard to identify priorities, right? If I don't have a plan that says, here's what I want to achieve and here's how I'm going to achieve it, then it's really easy for things that don't matter as much to creep up onto my plate. So again, sorry for those of you who've heard me get on this soapbox a million times, but I'm going to get up on it one more time, and probably a million times after today. But I will say that you have to have a written plan. You have to have that written fund development plan that says, this is what we have to achieve and this is how we're going to achieve it. Otherwise, you have no basis for identifying your priorities and ultimately which things are going to have the highest return on investment, right? Because our plan is our opportunity to take a step back and say, what activities are going to be the highest return on investment? Just because you've been doing certain strategies and you've been enacting certain things doesn't mean that they're the best thing to do. So developing your plan is your opportunity to say, wow, is that activity the thing we should be doing, or should we be focusing more of our time on something else? I'll point to, I'm sure all of you have seen this before, but this is so helpful and so important that I think it warrants being shown again. So for those of you who haven't seen it, this is Stephen Coveys, Urgent and Important from his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And on the y-axis, we have level of importance, and then on the x-axis, we have level of urgency. And what Covey talks about is the fact that there's all of these, every activity kind of fits into one of these quadrants, either being highly urgent versus not urgent, or being highly important versus not important. And the reality is that in a perfect world, we would be spending our time on those activities that are the most important, right? That importance would be kind of the first qualifier of what we would work on, with urgency being the secondary qualifier of what we work on. That we would kind of always work on those things that are urgent and important first, and then and then important and not urgent second. The reality, though, is that urgency tends to be our driver. Urgency tends to be the main motivator. And unfortunately, urgency is not something that we always control, right? This isn't always urgency that we're putting on something. In fact, when I talk to people out in the field, 9 times out of 10, the urgency is external. The urgency is being placed on you by other people. And so I show you this because as you're dealing with these frustrations, right, as we're getting to the core of your frustrations and we're trying to diagnose the things that are causing this frustration, I want you to be able to, every time something comes up and you feel like you're getting pulled away from those priorities that we talked about in the last slide, I want you to be able to assess these things. Is this urgent and is this important? And if it's not important, and if someone else is placing the urgency on an unimportant item, you need to be able to identify that and have a conversation with the people who are putting that urgency on you to say, I appreciate that this is an urgent issue for you, but it is not something that outranks the priorities that I have on my plate today. So either we need to find a way for this to not be as urgent, or you need to find another way to get it done, right? And I know it's very easy for me to sit in my office right now talking to my screen about and simulating these conversations. They're much harder conversations to have in the real world. But the first step of having these hard conversations with people and saying no is identifying which things you should be able to say no to, right? And being able to say, you know what, I'm going to say yes to this because I get that there's a lot of urgency, but there's also a lot of importance for this. So just being able to identify that, I think, is a really important thing. As we talk about major gifts particularly, and this was a really great article that was in the Training for Good blog. I have to add the website here down at the bottom. They had a really great blog post about this topic, and particularly about how do you prioritize for major gifts. And I know that a lot of you are trying to do major gifts. When I talk to clients, I have a lot of people who want to have great intentions when it comes to major gifts, and yet just can't quite get it done. And part of this comes down to the realities that a lot of other activities we do, whether it be events, foundations, corporate giving, a lot of those things have external deadlines that are kind of imposed on us, right? So, if I'm putting on an event, I've got to get the cake ordered by a certain day, and I've got to sign the contract with the vendor by a certain date, and I've got deadlines for 100 million things when it comes to planning an event. Same with foundations. Foundations will say, hey, we have these deadlines. You've got to get this proposal into us. And if you get funded, you've got to get this report into us. And there's all these deadlines that get imposed on us from other people. When it comes to major gift activities, when it comes to individual giving, there's not a lot of external deadlines, right? Mr. and Mrs. Smith aren't necessarily kind of breathing down our necks saying, gosh, we really should go to lunch one of these days and continue to build our relationship, right? There's not, most of these things when it comes to major gifts are self-imposed deadlines, right? We have to create systems where we are getting out there and we're creating deadlines for moving these people on this relationship continuum, that we're moving forward this relationship, because they're not going to impose it on us, but we know we're missing out on opportunities by not doing these activities. So when you think about prioritizing, particularly your major gift activities, Training for Good had a really good system here and a way of thinking about this, which was around kind of A level, B level, and C level activities. And that really we should, obviously be prioritizing A level activities first. And this is really direct engagement and contact with your customer, with your client, with your prospect, right? And that it's easy, it's easy to get caught up in actions and activities that are related to major gifts, but don't ever actually kind of get us out the door, right? So this point they make about C-level activities, which, and they make this point about, ironically, we tend to love these because they're comfortable, right? This is the stuff that's like making your travel arrangements and fiddling with your calendar, ordering incentives, all of these things that in our heads, we're saying to ourselves, well, this is related to major gifts. All of these things I'm doing are for our major gift program, but they're not getting to the core of what's really going to move the needle, which is getting out the door and meeting with people, right? So, and then even when you think about B-level activities, those things that get you closer to an A-level activity, but again, aren't getting you out the door. So this is things like prospect research, this is donor planning, strategizing, all of which is important. Not to say that these things aren't important, but they aren't the thing that are really moving the needle, right? What's really moving the needle with these major gift prospects is you getting out the door and meeting with them. And so being able to kind of understand the distinction between an A, a B, and a C-level activity, and then being able to categorize when you look at your time and you look at how you're spending your time on major gifts. Was this an A? Don't just say, gosh, I spent 8 hours on major gifts today. I want you to go in and break down. So, okay, of that 8 hours that you spent on major gifts, what was an A level, what was a B level, and what was a C level? And I get that you have to spend some time on all of these things at some time, right? I mean, all of these things require time, but they require different levels of time. So if you, and we're going to talk later in this, I know everyone's favorite words, time study. I'm going to talk about time study later in the webinar. But as you think about maybe doing some time study and look at how you're breaking out your time, really being able to be honest and assess how you're spending your major gift time, I think is a really, really important thing. And again, just some more information from this Training for Good blog. Remember that for direct donor activity, those A-level activities, if you are the major gift officer or if you are the relationship manager for that person, you are irreplaceable, right? And so the other thing as we think about how we spend our time and how we get to that frustration bubble, right? How we get to that frustration is, how do we look at the way we're spending our time and really assessing if we're the right people to be doing the things that we're doing, right? And so, if in fact you are the major gift officer or you are the relationship manager and you are the one who should be doing that direct donor activity, but you're not able to get out there because you're spending your time on some of those B and C level activities, you need to stop and think about, is there somebody else in our office who's better suited to be doing the B and C level activities so that I can do the A level activities, right? Because we know that some of those B and C level activities have to happen. We can't not order the incentives, right? We can't not do some of those things, but is there a way for some of those things to come off of your plate so that you are able to do that direct donor activity that only you can do, right? This is true too for those of you who are on the call who are CEOs or heads of schools, or those of you who are responsible for kind of managing up to your heads of schools or your CEOs. There are going to be certain donors that only they can meet with, right? And this is true of board members too. And so how are you making sure that when you're looking at the time that they spend on development, and you think about how you're managing their time spent on development, that you're really assessing the A, B, and C levels for their time, right? Because if they're coming back to you and saying, I only have X amount of time to spend on development, and it needs to be the highest priority stuff, make sure it's that direct donor activity where only they can do it. And again, for incidental activities, you are probably very valuable to doing that, but you're probably one step removed. It's one step removed from that one-on-one personal donor interaction. So things like emails, prospect research. Is there a way for you to, again, reshuffle some of that work if in fact this is the challenge for you? If in fact your biggest frustration is you're not able to get out the door to do those face-to-face engagement opportunities with your top prospects, how can we get some of those other things off your plate? And then ultimately, how do you organize your day so that most of your time is spent on donor work? So, talking about planning your day, this is some good tips from Patricia Hutchings, who's a time management coach. And she talks, and this is kind of stuff I'm sure a lot of you have heard in the past, but I think it's always good for us to be reminded that you need to leave 40% of your week open. And I know that that's hard. I know that when you're working in an organization, especially some of you who work in really large, complex organizations, this can be a real challenge. And I remember I worked for many, many years for Big Brothers Big Sisters of America, a very large, complex national organization. And there would be weeks when I would look at my calendar, and without me ever touching my calendar, before I knew it, my week was full because other people would send me meeting requests and I would accept them. And without me ever thinking about what my week should look like, my week would be full. And there was some of you may have seen, there was a post on LinkedIn the other day by, I think it was the CEO of Basecamp, did a post on LinkedIn the other day, and he made the comment that he thinks we should just do away with meeting requests, right? That no one else should be able to take your time, right? That no one else should ever be able to just take that time is a deeply personal thing, and no one should ever be able to kind of steal your time. And it was clearly kind of a provocative statement meant to elicit a response from people, and it did. But I think it's an interesting concept. It's something that if that's the case in your organization, if you find that there's just a ton of meetings, we're going to talk about meetings here in more detail in a minute. If you're finding that you feel like you've lost control of your calendar, if you feel like other people are kind of just taking up your calendar, it's probably a good conversation to have organizationally. It's probably a good thing at a leadership team meeting or at your development team meeting to sit down and talk about, how do we respect other people's times? How do we have meetings, and how do we get things done in a way that respects that people need to own their own calendars? So just kind of a side note for those of you who do feel like you're in a situation like that. Keep Monday and Friday scheduled time to a minimum. This is one of those that I really try to do. I try to, as little as possible, actually schedule things on Mondays and Fridays. I try to leave those pretty open. So again, just a few tips to help you. And then ultimately plan your donor work first. So this is the other thing that tends to happen in organizations, is that what tends to get planned first are things like staff meetings and, weekly meetings with such and such. And again, meetings that people are sending you meeting requests for, I have to have a vendor meeting for this event, or I have, all of these things, that tends to be the stuff that gets put on your calendar first. And then we kind of look at our week and say, okay, well, it looks like I have, an hour on Tuesday where I can do some donor strategy. And then maybe I have, a couple of hours on Thursday where hopefully Mr. Smith is available for lunch. If he's not, too bad, because I have no other time this week to meet with him. And, maybe I have a half an hour on Friday morning that I can do some more strategy with my team. And this is the opposite of how we should be approaching this. Our donors are the most important people to us, right? And so we need to treat them like VIPs, and VIPs get thought of first, right? And so if our donors are really our VIPs, then we are making them the priority. And so I get it. Some of you are shaking your heads and saying that's not realistic. But again, this is about pushing towards an ideal, right? I know you're not going to be able to change this tomorrow, but how do you start to change your organizational culture to say, this is how I plan my calendar. Once donor work is planned, then here's the times that I'm available for staff meetings, for other meetings, for these kinds of things. And I know that it's not always going to be perfect, but again, let's try to strive for excellence, right? Let's try to change some culture, to change some systems and processes so that we can get closer to this ideal where we are planning our donor work first. So again, and this means taking a very different approach to, how often and early we're getting in touch with donors to get on their calendars, to making sure that we're planning those visits when our calendars are still open and free, so that we do have lots of options for them when we're making those calls. And again, and even some of these things may be regular meetings, right? So you may institute a regular strategy session with your team just on donor strategy, and that might be a regular meeting on your calendar, but that meeting is getting scheduled ahead of maybe any other other staff meetings about other things, because we know that these strategy sessions are the priority. So again, just make sure that you're planning your donor work first. And again, Mr. Covey, so wise, you have to decide what your highest priorities are and have the courage, pleasantly, smilingly, non-apologetically, to say no to other things. And the way to do that is by having a bigger yes burning inside. It's really part of why I think people have a really hard time saying no. I mean, first and foremost, it's just uncomfortable. We all, many of us, and I say this knowing full well this is me, many of us are people pleasers, right? Many of us, we don't want to let people down. We want to please people. But part of the other biggest reason I think it's really hard for people to say no is because we don't necessarily know what the bigger priority is, right? So again, this goes back to priorities. This goes back to that fund development plan and knowing what it is that you should be working on, right? And if I don't know what my priorities are, if I don't know what that bigger yes is, it's then really hard to say no to somebody, right? So that's a really key piece of this. But how do we find that bigger yes, right? So again, I go back, and this is actually a slide I pulled right out of a metrics workshop that I do, because ultimately a lot of this comes down to how do we measure what we should be doing and how do we measure our progress against it. But I thought this was really relevant to how do we find that bigger yes. I mean, ultimately we want to focus on our priorities. We have to use our fund development plan as a guide, and I know I keep harping on it, but it is so important. One of the things that I often talk about when I talk about fund development planning is that a really good plan is as good at telling us what we are going to do as telling us what we're not going to do. So again, if we have a really great fund development plan that outlines what it is we're supposed to be working on, when people come and want to put other things on our plates, it becomes easier to say no, because it's not personal. It's not, I think what you are bringing me is bad. I think that this is a terrible idea. Instead, you're able to say, gosh, that's actually a really great idea, but you'll remember this fund development plan that we pulled together for this year. This is really our guide for the year and really is dictating for us what it is we're going to focus on. Maybe this thing that you've brought me, let's table it because it might be something we want to include next year, right? But again, it gives us the power to say no to people. Think about your gaps and challenges, right? So as you're thinking about, for those of you who maybe don't have a plan or who have a plan but want to prioritize even more, when you're looking at achievement toward that plan, where are you not hitting the mark, right? What are those things that continue to be a challenge for you? And for many people, this is major gifts. For many people, this is just shifting from focusing too much of their time on other activities and not focusing on major gifts. For those of you who are focusing on major gifts, maybe it's focusing on a certain subset of donors. But where are those gaps and challenges? That is your bigger yes. What is the area that you know you want to do better in, but you just can't seem to move the needle? That's your bigger yes. And what's keeping you up at night, right? So when you wake up, and I've been, in the field, and I know what it's like to have that like 3 o'clock in the morning, wake up in the middle of the night and think, oh, shoot, I didn't do that thing, or oh, what's going to happen when XYZ? What's that thing that's keeping you up at night? That's your bigger yes. And then ultimately, what can you measure? Because if we can't measure it, we can't know that we're making progress on it. So what are those things that are measurable, that you can consistently and accurately kind of look at your progress on and know that you're making progress? Those are really important. So I'm going to pause here. It doesn't look like I have any questions yet. I will just remind everybody that there is a Q&A box. If you have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A box. If for any reason I don't get to your question today, because if it gets submitted late or whatever it is, please know that I will absolutely email you after today's webinar to answer any questions that you have. Or if you think of a question after the webinar today, I know for me, I'm kind of a muller. I have to kind of mull things over, and sometimes, even a day later, I'll think of something like, oh gosh, I wish I would have asked XYZ. Please feel free. I'm going to be providing my email address at the end of this webinar. Please feel free to email me with any questions that you might not have gotten to ask today. So again, just feel free to enter that anytime. So moving forward, another barrier that I think people have in terms of being really effective in terms of their time and their work is roles and responsibilities. And it feels like one of those things that we should talk about all the time and we should know how to do really well, but very often do we do this really well? And I'll just share with you, I hear this a lot from organizations that I work with, and this is something I've experienced firsthand. And for some of you, hopefully this will sound familiar. For those of you who it doesn't sound familiar, I think that's actually really good news. But how often have you been in a situation where you've been working on a big project for months? Maybe a lot of times I hear this when it comes to things like annual reports or big marketing projects or big print publication projects, or systems implementations, database conversions, or any kind of big project. You're working on this big project and you almost get to the end. You're almost to the end. You're about ready to release. You're about ready to mail, whatever it is. You're about ready to wrap it up. And somebody comes along and says, well, why wasn't I informed about this? Right? Someone who maybe it occurred to you at some point you should get input from, but you didn't think it was that big of a deal, or someone who you thought you had gotten input from, but they didn't feel they did, and suddenly your whole project is derailed, right? And now suddenly something that you've put months of work into and thought you were almost done with, you're almost going back to the drawing board, back to square one, to start over because you didn't, because there was some person or some people who felt like they needed to have a role in this project and they weren't given a role in the project. This is something that I hear a lot. So some of you this might sound really familiar. Some of you might think I'm crazy and not know what I'm talking about. Hopefully, those of you who think I'm crazy and don't know what I'm talking about, that's a good thing, because this isn't a problem for you and your organization. But for those of you who you can feel me on this one, this is a really great tool. This is a tool called the RASCI, and you can see here on the left-hand side, RASCI, that's where it comes from. This is something that I have been using for a few years, shared with me by a very, very smart man named Nick Booth. And something that I think I really encourage, especially people who work in larger, kind of more complex organizations, to implement. And what it does is for any activity, for any action item, to use it in your project management, that you're assigning people roles. So whether they're responsible, and there's always one person somebody has to be responsible. So there's always an R, and there's somebody has to approve things, be the decision maker. But besides being responsible or being an approver, do people have roles on the project team? Are they supporting this? Are they helping to make things happen within this project? Versus being a consult. So some people may not actively be supporting the project, but they may be somebody that you have to consult at certain decision points, right? And so there might be somebody that you just need to say, okay, here's our progress, here's where we are, what do you think? And they're consulted before a final decision is made, versus an inform, an I, which is really somebody who you just are going to tell, right? In people who are I's, people who are informs, they don't have veto power. They don't get to say, I don't like this, so you can stop. They are merely people who it's information only. It's an FYI kind of role. And so what I like about this is that before you begin a big project, or as you're developing your fund development plan for the year and you're outlining your action steps, you can assign a RASCI role to everyone who you think is going to be involved in this. And then at that point in time, before you get started, you can go to everyone and you can say, okay, everyone, here are your roles in this upcoming project or in our fund development plan this year. Let me know what you think. And at that point, if somebody who is assigned an I doesn't want to be an I, if they say, well, actually, I'd like to be able to have some veto power here. Like, I don't just want to be informed. I want to be consulted on this. You can, at that point, change them to a C and know that that's where the role that they want to play, or vice versa. I've had people say, you know what, you don't need to consult me on this. I trust you. Like, just show it to me. I just want to know what you're doing. I don't need to give any input on this. So again, I know I'm spending a lot of time on this, but I think this is a really important and really helpful system, especially for those of you who have had the experience where you've kind of gotten down the road on a project and gotten a little railroaded because people didn't know what their roles were. So let's talk, I'm going to shift for a minute and talk a little bit about distractions, because, not everything is about lack of priorities or lack of planning or sometimes we just are distracted. And this is, I work from home, and I've worked from home for a very long time. And I always have people say to me, oh gosh, Laurel, I don't know how you work from home. I would be so distracted. And I think, well, I don't know that I'm any more distracted working from home than I ever was when I worked in the office. It's just different distractions, right? So, but this was a study that was done by Career Builder, and they asked employers what they thought that how their workers waste time. And I think obviously cell phone and texting was a big one, internet, gossip, social media. You can kind of see here all of the things that people are citing as distractions. So I think it's really important for us to be able to identify, what and who gets in our way, right? What are those distractions for us? Are they external, or let's be honest with ourselves, are they internal? How much of the time is it that we're letting ourselves be distracted by Facebook or texts or whatever it is? So, really being able to get to the core of this. Now, I will make a case that distractions aren't always a bad thing, right? There's a lot of research and that goes into this idea that, human beings' brains are not meant to function, in 8-hour blocks, right? That in some ways, letting ourselves get distracted is a way of letting our brains take a break, right? Because it just doesn't make sense that you can kind of go for 8 hours straight and then suddenly, stop working. In fact, what I find about working from home is that I actually tend to work, I don't tend to have a 9 to 5 schedule. I tend to work when I am inspired and when I am enthusiastic and motivated, and working from home allows me to do that. So if my peak hours of productivity are from 10 o'clock at night to 12 o'clock at night, I can do that. And some of you probably do that as well. But again, so I'm not giving you all free rein to be distracted, but I will say that I don't know that distractions are entirely an evil thing, but I do think it's important for us to be able to be really honest about distractions and be really honest about how much they're a distraction and what role other people are playing in that, what role you're playing in it. And if there are major distractions in your office, if there are, people who tend to be major distractions, if there's a noise issue, again, those are things that you should be talking about as a team and, just trying to work through them. But also, again, I just encourage you to be really honest with yourself. And there are so many distractions now. We've become, kind of so just needing of distraction now. I mean, with cell phones and social media and everything, there's just so many different ways to be distracted. So if you're finding that that's the case, think about how you're managing it. I think it's really important. And then ultimately, what are some of the ways to encourage productivity? Schedule breaks. I think this is so, I think back to, when I worked like at Baskin Robbins when I was in high school, and, like I got told when I was going to take a break, right? Somebody said, okay, Laurel, it's 3:00, go take your break. It's mandatory, but for many of us, it's not mandatory that we take breaks. And I'll find, I'll be sitting at my desk, and before I know it, I'll realize that I've been sitting at my desk for 4 hours and not even notice it. So find ways to schedule breaks. Put it in your calendar. Have a little alarm that goes off on your phone or on your computer that says, okay, it's break time. Give yourself that ability to step away from what you're working on and take a break, clear your head, come back to whatever it is you're working on with a fresh perspective. Work near productive people. This is a really important one for those of you who are managers who might have some maybe unproductive employees. Put them near the people who are really productive because, again, leading by example. Be publicly accountable. This is a really big one. Making sure that if employees are having, if your team is having a really hard time focusing on the right areas or getting motivated, find some way to publicly share what it is everybody's working on every day. I know that, we use Basecamp at the Osborne Group. There's a mechanism where you can say, hey, what did you work on today? And everybody can put in there what they worked on that day. And then take a walk. So this is when, if workers are having trouble concentrating, have them step out of the office for a 10 to 20 minute walk. So this is one of those things, I wear a Fitbit. I don't know how many of you out there wear a Fitbit. I feel like I see them more and more often now. They actually have a measure where it'll show you how many hours out of the day you took at least 250 steps in that hour. And I love that measure, not only as a measure of fitness, but as a measure of like how often did I get away from my desk, because I'll find that if I'm really absorbed in something, there will be like a 4 to 5 hour chunk of time that I did not take 250 steps. Like 250 steps is like 2 minutes of walking. It is not a lot of steps. It's for me the equivalent of like going to my kitchen and getting some more water. It's not a lot of steps. So even if you don't have a Fitbit, like find some way. Maybe it's a little alarm that goes off on your phone every hour that you just kind of perks you up and gets you to be more productive. So I want to talk for a minute, we're kind of in this mode of talking about our challenges and distractions and meetings. I thought it was interesting in the Career Builder study that meetings came up as a distraction. And the reality is they are. Oh my gosh, I mean, how many of us have sat in meetings thinking, what am I doing here? There are 50 million other things that I could be doing right now that would be more productive than being in this meeting right now. And so I found this really great from projectmanagementhacks.com, 7 Habits of Highly Effective Meetings. It's a really great article, and I liked the 7 habits. So having a written agenda, I know it sounds obvious, but how often do you go to a meeting where, especially standing meetings, and I will make my case right now for really assessing standing meetings, especially standing staff meetings. I have so many people I work with and so many organizations that I myself have worked with where we have a standing, weekly team meeting or a standing one-on-one meeting or standing organization-wide meetings. I advise you to take a really hard look at those meetings and what's being accomplished. I would much rather somebody schedule a meeting with me 2 days ahead of time because there's something really important that we have to talk about than have a standing meeting on my calendar where I feel like nothing gets done. So again, I know it's not on this list, but just a case for really assessing standing meetings. But have an agenda. it seems obvious, but have a reason why you're coming together. Make sure the right people are attending the meeting. A lot of times you'll have a meeting and, the CEO can't be there, but the purpose of the meeting is to make a decision on something, and the CEO has final decision-making power over that, and yet they can't make the meeting, but you have the meeting anyway. It makes no sense. So make sure the right people are coming to your meeting, and if the right people can't come, don't have the meeting. If the person who has to make the final decision can't make the meeting, don't have the meeting. Simple stuff. Manage the meeting by the clock. This is a big pet peeve for me. I have a lot of clients, and I've worked for organizations where there is a culture of tardiness, and it is so not cool. It's one of those things where everyone in the organization just kind of like, oh yeah, we're all always late, which is fine. I guess it's fine when you're just working with internal groups, but the minute you meet with a donor, the minute you meet with a vendor, a consultant, somebody outside of your organization, and suddenly your cultural habit of being 5 minutes late now is being disrespectful to people outside of your organization, then it's a problem. So, make sure you're starting and ending on time. Use a parking lot. I know a lot of you already do this, but parking lots are great ways to stay on topic, because you're able to say, gosh, Jim, that's a really, really great point, and I do want to talk about that, but let's talk about it next time. And then make sure you talk about it next time. Don't, just use the parking lot as a way to falsely appease people. Make sure that you are actually going back and addressing those parking lot issues. Pre-wire important decision points. So if there's something really controversial or something that's really important, have discussions with people before you go into the meeting. Make sure that everybody's on board and everybody understands why you're having these discussions, why they're so important, and that they're prepared to have those discussions and not taken off guard. Take notes. Obvious one, but a lot of people don't take notes anymore. And if you're going to take notes on your computer, I will just say, make sure that you tell people at the beginning of the meeting that what you're doing is taking notes. Because I think a lot of people do see people typing on their computers during a meeting and think that they're just like emailing people and not paying attention. So just if you're going to take notes on a device, just make sure that everybody in the meeting knows that that's what you're doing. And then follow up. Send out the notes from the meeting, follow up on any parking lot items, and make sure that you're actually following up. So just a few, I think meetings can be important, and meetings can be great places to get things done, but they can also notoriously be terrible time sucks and be really ineffective. So just make sure if you are having meetings that they are actually productive. So your homework is to identify your time wasters. Is it a meeting issue? Are there distractions? Are they things that other people are imposing on you, or are they self-generated factors that are wasting your time? Identify what they are, and then develop a plan for overcoming them, right? And maybe that's having a meeting with your team. Maybe it's, and I really encourage you to create an open space for people to be able to do this themselves. So, have this conversation with your team and say, I want this to be an environment where if you feel like there are distractions that are external to you, that we can have a conversation on how we address those, and make it safe for people to talk about that. And then I have just a couple more slides as we get ready to wrap up here. I like this from Peter Bregman, 18-minute or less 3-step plan, because again, I'm somebody who by nature is not particularly organized. So I like having some systems that I can easily kind of implement into my day. So just the first 5 minutes of the day, set your plan. So before you turn on your computer, just kind of sit for 5 minutes and jot down, what will make this day successful? What do you have to do today? And for me, I can get really overwhelmed with my massive to-do list and feel really overwhelmed by all of the things I have to do. But when I take those 5 minutes to just say, what's the most important thing that I have to do today? It really helps me feel less overwhelmed, and B, feel more empowered to do what I need to do. And then refocus again, 1 minute every hour. Just stop for a second and, check in. How are you doing? Are you getting everything done that you said you wanted to get done today? If you're falling behind, adjust. And, don't wait until 4 o'clock to do this every hour, because sometimes, and there are times when I am taking longer on a project, not because I need to, but because because it's fun, because I keep getting distracted by other things. And so suddenly something that I thought was going to take me 2 hours is taking me 4 hours and kind of blowing the rest of my day. So it's important that we refocus continually through the day. And then at the end of the day, turn off your computer, think about what you worked on, what got in your way, how can you be better tomorrow. So a couple of tools that I wanted to mention to you. The first one, a tool that we have at the Osborne Group, we call the Spending Time Wisely worksheet. And this is really a way for you to think about priorities and time allocation. So what this worksheet does, and I'll just show you all really quickly. Whoops, let me pull this up. So this is the Spending Time Wisely worksheet, and this is an example for a manager. And you can see here that basically what it is you can outline your priorities. And we have some that we've filled in here, but you will have your own that you have, the different priorities you have. And then you have the ability to put what percentage of time you perceive that you're working on this versus how much time you're actually working on this. And of course, the only way to get to actuals is by doing a time study, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. And then what's your supervisor's preference? So what do you think is happening? What's actually happening? And what should you be, what should the reality be, right? And so this worksheet just kind of helps you think through that and helps you to get to that ideal, right? So if you think that you should be spending, maybe you and your supervisor sit down and you think you should be spending 10% of your time on planning. You think you're spending 5% of your time, but then when you do your time study, you're actually spending 20% of your time. How do you then kind of make some shifts and get to that ideal amount of time is really important. So going back to that. So again, what's desirable versus actual. And again, the only way to really get to actual is by doing a time study. And I know people hate it. I know it's a big pain. And I know that it's just feels like one more thing that you have to do. But it really is the only way to get that data. There's no, otherwise everything is just assumptions. And we are terrible at assuming our time, right? I try to keep a time study all the time. And I find the difference between when I'll have weeks where I'm actually doing my time study throughout the day versus when I wait till Friday and I try to go back and estimate how I spent my time. It's worlds different. We are not good estimators of how we actually spend our time. The only good way to get this data is to actually do a time study. What I recommend is picking a 2-week time frame. Oh, and it says July 10th through here. That ignore that. Just pick a 2-week time frame that's a typical 2 weeks for you. Get ready for it. Have everybody ready and track your time. And if you need, I have a sample Excel spreadsheet time study. You can also use tools like Toggle. There's a ton of free apps that let you do this. Find something that works for you, and don't feel like you have to do it year round. Just do it when it makes sense for you. But like I said, pick a 2-week period that is representative of a typical 2-week period for you. So it doesn't look like I have any other questions. But again, if you think of anything after today's webinar, please shoot me an email, give me a call. Happy to answer any questions that you have. And I'll just wrap up with this quote from Dr. Maya Angelou. The best part of life is not surviving, but thriving with passion and compassion and humor and style and generosity and kindness. So again, this isn't just about getting through our days. This is about putting all we have into these organizations that we care so much about, but having the energy and the humor and the generosity to do it in a way that helps us thrive and helps the people that we serve thrive, and make sure that we're living a good life and not just putting everything we have into our work, but that we're really enjoying it while we're doing it. So that's a little bit of inspiration from Dr. Angelou before we wrap up today. As I mentioned, I am happy to share the Spending Time Wisely worksheet with you. I actually have 3 versions of it. I have a manager version, I have a frontline fundraiser version, and I have a version for those of you who are directors of small shops where maybe you don't have staff, but you're kind of managing everything. So please, if you'd like a copy of any of those, please email me, let me know which one, or if you'd like them all. Just let me know. And if you'd like a copy of my time study template, I'm happy to share that as well. elmacombs@theosborngroup.com. Again, follow us on LinkedIn, follow us on Twitter, check out my YouTube channel. I've got a few other webinar recordings there. And with that, I will wrap it up and wish you all a very wonderful rest of your day. Thanks so much.